Just off the edge of a growing Twin Cities suburb, a grass path slips between tall pines, crosses an old prairie, and disappears into the woods. It looks like ordinary countryside, yet almost none of it is an accident. This ground was shaped by a wall of ice, claimed and named and signed away, and then in our own lifetimes deliberately set aside to grow wild again. Welcome to Lake Elmo Park Reserve. We are in the East Metro of the Twin Cities, in Washington County, a short drive from the old lumber town of Stillwater and the St. Croix River that marks the Wisconsin line. The reserve spreads across more than 2,000 acres of rolling hills between the city of Lake Elmo and the river valley, and this quiet corner is its network of grass Nordic trails. None of these gentle hills would be here without the glaciers. Near the height of the last ice age, a great tongue of ice called the Superior Lobe pushed down from the northeast and stalled across this part of Minnesota. Along its melting edge, it dumped a long ridge of sand, gravel, and boulders called the St. Croix Moraine, a rumpled belt of high ground that still loops around the Twin Cities. These rolling swells underfoot are its worn remains. The ice left more than hills. As the glacier wasted away, huge blocks broke off and were buried in all that sand and gravel. When each stranded block finally melted, the ground above it slumped into a bowl, and the bowls filled with rain and meltwater to become kettle lakes and ponds. Shallow Eagle Point Lake at the heart of the reserve is one of these hollows, a few feet deep in most places, a footprint pressed by a vanished slab of ice. This is a borderland in more ways than one. It sits on the old seam where the tallgrass prairie of the west ran up against the hardwood big woods of the east, and the meeting of the two produced oak savanna, scattered bur oaks standing in a sea of grass. A single walk here still carries you from open, sunlit prairie into shady pine and hardwood, exactly as the land was patched together long before any road reached it. Long before it was anyone's county, this was Dakota homeland. The Dakota people call this country Mni Sota Makoce, the land where the waters reflect the clouds. The Mdewakanton, the people of Spirit Lake, kept villages and planting grounds along the Mississippi and the lower St. Croix, and lakes like this one were larder and home, their shallows and marshes rich with fish, waterfowl, wild rice, and game. Look at a map, and you can see why this exact ground mattered. It lies inside the triangle of land pinched between two great rivers, the Mississippi to the west and the St. Croix to the east. That river corridor was shared and traveled by the Dakota and by the Ojibwe, the Anishinaabe, who had moved into the pine country upstream, and its towering white pine forests were about to draw hungry eyes from far away. In the summer and fall of 1837, this wedge of country changed hands on paper. In one treaty, the Ojibwe, and in another, the Dakota, were pressured to cede the land between the Mississippi and the St. Croix to the United States for payments and promises that were poorly kept. What the government wanted was not farmland at all. It was the pine. Almost at once, the St. Croix Valley became one of the great lumber frontiers of America. Loggers felled the giant white pines through the winter, drove the logs down the river in the spring, and sorted them at booms near Stillwater, just over the hills from here. That river town became known as the birthplace of Minnesota, and the fortunes cut from these forests built the mansions and the railroads that reshaped the whole territory. Behind the loggers came the farmers. Immigrant families broke the prairie sod on the moraine, drained the wet swales, and turned the rolling glacial ground into a checkerboard of grain fields and dairy pastures. A small farm settlement grew up beside the largest local lake, a plain and practical place that everyone simply called Bass Lake for the fish that filled it. Then came the railroad, and with it, a bit of romance. In 1879, a railway promoter named Alpheus Stickney rechristened the plain little lake, borrowing from a novel his wife adored. The book was St. Elmo, one of the runaway bestsellers of its century, and its brooding hero lent the water a grander title. Bass Lake became Lake Elmo, and the name spread from the water to the village and eventually to this park. For a century, those tired fields fed the county, until a bolder idea took hold. In 1970, the Washington County Board set this land aside not as a manicured park, but as a park reserve, a special kind of public ground with a promise attached. At least 80% of its more than 2,000 acres would be kept or returned to a natural state, so that in time it would come to look as it had before the settlers ever arrived. That promise is the whole character of the place. Instead of mowing the old farm fields into lawn, crews have been coaxing them back toward prairie and oak savanna, reseeding native grasses, letting the wetlands refill, and using patient prescribed fire the way the land once knew it. It is slow, deliberate work, healing a piece of glacial country and handing it back, wilder than they found it. These wide grass lanes we are following are the reserve's Nordic ski trails, groomed white and silent in winter for cross-country skiers gliding over the glacial swells. In the green months they belong to walkers, and they make a perfect way to read the land, up over a moraine crest into the sun, then down into cool woods, then out again above the shining water of Eagle Point Lake. Kept wild on purpose, the reserve is anything but empty. Deer step out of the oak shade at dusk, wild turkeys pick through the grass, and the marshy shallows of the lake draw herons, turtles, and rafts of ducks and geese. In spring and fall, the sky fills with migrating birds following the great river valleys south, resting for a while on the very waters the ice left behind. Every quiet mile here holds a deeper story. A glacier built these hills. Two peoples called this country home and were pressed to give it up. Loggers took the pine, farmers wore the ground down, and then a later generation chose to heal a piece of it and keep it wild. Thank you for walking the Nordic Trails of Lake Elmo Park Reserve with Fru World Explorer. Subscribe and come along for the next trail, because there is always another path waiting and another story hiding in plain sight.